You know, we throw around the word theory all the time. I have a theory about why my plants keep dying. Or, my theory is this season of the show is going to have a crazy twist. But what if I told you that when a scientist uses the word theory, they mean something completely different, something way, way more powerful than just a hunch? So, what's the real difference? Let's get into it.
And right here, this is the heart of the whole mix-up. On one side, you've got our everyday theory, which is basically just a guess, right? A hunch. But on the other side, you have the scientific theory, a rock-solid, evidence-based explanation for why something happens. And honestly, getting the difference between these two is the key to unlocking everything else we're going to talk about.
Okay, so first, let's dive into that everyday meaning. You know, when we say something is just a theory in a regular conversation, what are we really trying to say?
I mean, we've all done this, haven't we? We see two things happening in the world, like we see poverty and we see crime, and our brain makes a connection. We call that connection a theory, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually the very first spark of a really important question.
But here's where it gets interesting. Think about that little word, just. When someone says, that's just a theory, they're not asking for more evidence. They're shutting the conversation down. They're basically saying, your idea is flimsy, it's pure speculation, and it doesn't really count until you have some facts. And this right here is the biggest misunderstanding of them all.
So, to really understand why a scientific theory is so much more than a guess, we got to get on the same page with our vocabulary. We need to define a few of the core tools in the scientific toolkit. Let's lay that groundwork right now.
Okay, I know that sounds super academic, but let's break it down. Notice it doesn't say a guess or an idea. It says it's a logical description of interrelated parts. It's like a system. A theory isn't just one puzzle piece, it's the instruction manual that shows how all the different pieces fit together to create the big picture.
Now, a theory can't just float around in space, right? It needs real-world stuff to explain. And that's where social research comes in. Think of it like the engine. It's the process of going out into the world and gathering all the raw materials, the data, the observations, the evidence, that our theory is then going to organize and make sense of.
And this next step is absolutely crucial. Remember that idea about poverty and crime? Well, before we can even start to build a theory, we have to get specific. What do we actually mean by poverty? Are we talking about income, access to healthcare? And what kind of crime? This process, turning those fuzzy ideas into sharp, measurable concepts, is called conceptualization. You can't build with foggy ideas.
All right, so now we have our tools, a framework for a theory, a way to do research, and clearly defined concepts. So how do we put them all together? How do we go from a few interesting ideas to a full-blown, powerful explanation?
The most important thing to remember is this. A theory is not one single statement. It's more like a building. Each individual statement, what we call a proposition, is like a single brick. But a pile of bricks isn't a house, right? The real strength, the structure, comes from how those bricks are logically stacked together, with each one supporting the others.
And this is a perfect example of that building process. Let's just walk through it. It starts with a simple, common sense idea. People want to achieve goals. Makes sense. Then, step 2, reaching those goals feels good. Yep. Step 3, so not reaching them feels bad. It creates this frustrated energy. Step 4, that energy has to go somewhere, and aggression is one way to release it. And boom, you get the conclusion. Therefore, frustration leads to aggression. See how each step clicks into place, leading logically to the next? That is how you build a theory.
So, we've seen how a theory is built, brick by logical brick. But what's the whole point? What job does a theory actually do for us out here in the real world? How does it help us make sense of things?
The sociologist Earl Babby really nailed it with this quote. A theory isn't just pointing at something and saying what it is. It's a systematic explanation. It's the difference between saying, hey, that apple fell from the tree, and actually explaining the invisible force of gravity that pulled it to the ground.
And stigma theory is a fantastic real-world example. So we can all make the observation, gay people often face discrimination. That's the what. A theory comes along and asks, okay, but why? How does that actually happen? And it gives us a roadmap. It says, well, society has these expectations about gender. Not conforming to them gets labeled as a difference, a stigma, and that stigma is what fuels and justifies the discrimination. See how it connects the dots from a big social idea all the way down to a painful personal experience? That's the power of explanation.
Okay, so we know what a theory is, and we know how it works. But let's bring it all home. Why is this so incredibly important for doing good research?
or really, for just thinking clearly about the world. I want you to just let this quote sink in for a second. To make things that were hidden visible. That's it. That's the magic. A good theory is like putting on a pair of X-ray glasses. It lets you see the underlying structures, the hidden connections, the causes and effects that were completely invisible before.
A perfect way to think about it is that a theory is like scaffolding for our knowledge. First, it takes all the stuff we already know and organizes it into a strong, coherent structure. Then, it gives us a blueprint. It points and says, look over here. This is where we need to investigate next. It also acts like a filter, helping us sift through all the noise to find the evidence that actually matters. And maybe best of all, it allows us to build higher, to see things, and generate insights that we never would have discovered if we were stuck on the ground.
So let's circle all the way back to where we started. When you have a concept that is powerful enough to organize everything we know, to guide our search for truth, and to reveal the hidden workings of the world, can you really dismiss that as being just a theory? I think we know the answer. A good scientific theory isn't the end of the discussion. It's the beginning of real understanding. Thanks for joining me.